Living the good fat life with your host Karen and Sherry. They'll help everything align for your body, soul, and mind. The good fat life, whether change comes slow or dramatically. The good fat life will help you sort things out organically.
Okay, I gotta laugh again every time, Rob. You know that song makes me laugh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Rob Johnson, you're here today.
I am.
Yeah.
I am not behind the glass.
You're not behind the glass. Yeah. Welcome to the front of the glass.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, tell us who you are and why you're here today.
Yeah. So I'm Rob Johnson. So I'm the owner of Speakeasy Podcast Network here in Brighton, as well as Louisville, and also Wayne Media Group.
Next to the world. Right?
Yes. Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
And that's it. So just
thank you for being here today. It's so much
absolutely.
fun. Yeah, and we have a great guest. We have Samantha Kesteloot. She is an audiologist, and she's going to be talking to us. She's a doctor of audiology. She's going to be talking to us today about her journey with being, I don't know what the term is, I guess a non-hearing person to a hearing person, and what she does. And I'm really interested in to hear what she has to say. So let's introduce her.
I'm excited as well. My wife studied sign language interpreting, so I've had a kind of a small experience into this. So I'm very excited to get in and learn more about Sam's story.
Yeah. Okay. So Sam Kesteloot, welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Tell us what you do, Sam.
Sure. So my name is Dr. Samantha Kesteloot, and I am an educational audiologist with Trenton's oral program for the deaf and hard of hearing. So I graduated from Wayne State University in April of 2020 with my doctorate in audiology. Prior to that, I was we do kind of a residency year. It's called an externship in the audiology program. And I was in St. Louis, Missouri for a year at the Central Institute for the Deaf, which is a private school for kids with hearing loss. And prior to that, I was an educational audiology assistant. So I worked for 4 years in Lapeer County with kids who have hearing loss. And then I got my psychology degree from the University of Georgia. And I grew up with hearing loss. So I was late identified about the age of 4, which is common for us 90s babies. There was not universal hearing screenings back then, which catches a lot of kids much earlier now that have significant hearing loss. And that's huge for speech and language development. That auditory access piece is how you learn to speak and listen. So with the babies being identified earlier, we can get those interventions on sooner, and they can grow up to speak and listen. I'm excited to be here and share my story and answer some questions and all of that.
Well, Sam, part of your story is that you're a twin, right? You're paternal twin. And I'm guessing
identical, actually.
Oh, identical, really?
Yeah, Steph and I are identical. We look alike, but not entirely alike. So people are always
okay. All right, so my bad. So you're identical twin that doesn't look like her identical twin. So that's a whole other podcast.
Sure,
Rob. Yeah. Do you think that contributed maybe to part of being diagnosed later because you did have a twin? And I've heard about twin language. And can you tell us a little bit about having a hearing twin? And did you notice the difference? Like, can you start there as being a young twin that obviously you're not hearing, and you must have noticed other people heard? I mean, how did that? Yeah.
So it's kind of a complicated thing, so there's a few things I want to touch on here. But so, I had an identical twin sister. And so growing up, my mom said that we did have our own language between the cribs. We would be talking to each other in that way. But a huge thing that my mom has mentioned, like looking back on us growing up, because I kept up with my sister. I was able to, do all the things that she was doing. And prior to the age of my diagnosis, which was like about 4 years old, and my sister would speak for me. So my mom, you just don't necessarily notice that when you have the twin. One seems to be dominant over the other, and that sort of thing. So I think, and that's something I think growing up that really was a very key factor, I think, in my upbringing or whatever is that, my sister was very protective of me and she would help me. I relied on her a lot. I'm going to get emotional. I knew this was going to happen, but I relied on her a lot for communication and kind of like interpreting. If I wasn't understanding something, she would tell me. So that sort of thing was, I think, a huge a key factor in growing up. But then also, my parents didn't have lower expectations for me than they did for my sister. So I was always expected to be a straight A student. I was always expected to be involved. I was always expected to be a good kid. There were no excuses because I had a hearing loss or because I wore hearing aids or because I needed different equipment and, assistance in school. So I think that that's a really huge factor in like why I do what I do. And, I guess I don't want to say, the success I've had in some ways. It's just that high level of expectation that my parents had for me too. So those are the two main things I think that having a twin and having hearing loss or being the twin with hearing loss have like impacted me in that way.
Mm-hmm. So do you think your sister knew from the beginning that you couldn't hear? Is like instinctively?
Oh, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I think instinctively, you that's like that your twin is like your other half. So like you instinctively kind of try to compensate for what they can do, right? So she was always trying to help me and trying to protect me and trying to make sure I was included in that kind of thing. So I think that definitely has to be an instinct,
Mm-hmm. What about you as a child? Did you identify with like, wait, I'm not, there's a piece here I'm missing. Like things are coming out of people's mouth, but I'm the only one not comprehending it. Did you have an understanding of that?
Well,
I feel like that every day, Rob. I don't know about you.
What are you saying? Yeah. I think, sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought there. So this is kind of what we go back to in audiology. So, as a child or somebody born with hearing loss, you don't know necessarily what you're missing. So, my hearing aids, they were able to, they did the best they could at the time in terms of amplifying sounds into what I had left, the hearing that I did have. And so I was able to use, the technology, different coping strategies or different coping mechanisms, such as reading lips and, shaping my environment, those types of things. I think you just kind of make do, at least I did, I think, make do with what I could and use all those strategies to really try to understand what people were saying. I'm a very social person. I'm like huge into connecting with others. And so I was highly, highly motivated as a child to compensate and stay involved and those kinds of things. So I guess, I always knew that there was something that I was missing because obviously I was getting all these services and, I couldn't necessarily keep up with certain conversations or in situations. And you learn to smile and nod and fake it a little bit. And you just really honestly get through. It's really interesting now being an adult and having a cochlear implant, just looking back at having only hearing aids and like how tired I was, the amount of fatigue I had at the end of the day. It's just something you just get used to. And then after getting the cochlear implant and listening became so much less effortful. I mean, I had so much more energy. And so that's something I think people don't necessarily understand. You can kind of get by, but it's a lot of hard work and you're trying twice as hard. You have to, like, as a child with hearing loss, you have to hear things so many more times and more explicitly than a normal hearing child to understand a concept, or a new vocabulary and things like that. So listening fatigue is what we call it in audiology, and that's something that is pretty significant. And just personally, I've experienced that change of not being as fatigued anymore. And it's mind-blowing to me, and just knowing, like, the kids I work with in our program here in Trenton, they're working so hard. And then especially, now they have the visual cues gone with the face mask and stuff in school. So they're just working so hard to listen and communicate. So it's humbling
to be a
big,
big challenge. And I can imagine, because I know, I think we can all relate to listening fatigue, because I don't know about you, Rob, but I don't think any of us are listening enough. Like, listening's hard.
Yeah, I mean, it requires a lot of focus, and especially when you have more obstacles stacked on top of it. I really appreciate the perspective that you gave, Sam, is the amount of energy that has to be exerted when you're so focused into listening, because you can't hear as well as others, and as you're going through that, it requires a lot of focus and attention, and that's a lot of willpower that gets, I would assume, very draining by day's end.
Yeah.
And so much more for kids. And then you put other barriers in place, like they can't read facial cues because of masks or whatever it is. I would imagine that would be a very challenging environment to either try to teach in or just to be in the chair of the student.
Yeah. It must be very frustrating too, to have to go through that and ask people to, you must have had challenges with other people not understanding and getting frustrated with you when you're so tired and they expect you to be kind. Can you give us an example of maybe like a funny story that you've had with in that situation, or maybe not a funny story, maybe just as
just in terms of somebody misunderstanding or assuming I can hear and not, or something like that.
That you've had to go through the process and maybe they weren't as understanding as they could have been.
I had a lot of it actually in college. I had a couple of experiences in grad school when I was taking some prerequisite classes. I was taking linguistics? I think it might have been linguistics. I'm not entirely sure, but phonetics. It's phonetics. So as you know, phonemes are the sounds in words, and so in this class I was taking, you had to listen to a speaker and then write out the phonemes, and the phonemes change based on accents and type things like that. And the teacher was very not understanding. I'm like, I can't really do this assignment because I can't hear half these sounds that I'm supposed to be listening for. And she was pretty flippant about it. I mean, this is not a very good, I guess this is not a funny story, but she just she was very flippant about it. It's hard for everybody. And that was a pretty rude comment in terms of, this is a speech pathologist. She's got a degree in whatever she's doing. And then she says that as a person with hearing loss, or to a person with hearing loss who can't hear half the sounds of the English language and the most important sounds of the English language, which are those high pitches. She said, oh, it's hard for everybody. So that is, I think that's sometimes like Karen, you were saying earlier, you couldn't necessarily tell that I have hearing loss or whatever all the time. And so that is, that's kind of the danger of fitting in so well, as somebody with hearing loss, is people do forget. And you just have to be an advocate for yourself and really have that self-confidence and that awareness of knowing what you need that person to do, to ask them in a respectful way. And also to take a step back and realize a lot of people are pretty ignorant about hearing loss and about what it is actually, and the continuum of hearing loss and that sort of thing. So it's to me, it's always an opportunity to educate somebody. So I try not to get offended by people's comments that, are kind of flippant or derogatory or anything like that. I always try to use those experiences or those situations as a teaching moment.
Yeah. Speaking of that, can you tell us some of the misnomers about hearing loss that are detrimental to people trying to be hearing and trying to understand the English language with the deficit?
Sure. I think the biggest misconception that people have is that if you have hearing loss, that means you can't hear at all. So that's a huge one, because hearing is a continuum. So it ranges from low pitch to high pitch sounds. But then, it's also a loudness level of, very soft, quiet, what we call audiometric 0, which is the averages of the intensity of sound. And that's sort of what we call audiometric 0, excuse me. And then it gets louder as we go down the audiogram. And so low pitches require, they travel further. So the vibrations are slower and they're longer, so they travel further. And so those are actually more inside the organ of hearing, which is called the cochlea. And then the high pitches are, they take less energy, so they're more this, the more intense rapid vibrations. And so those are at the outer edge of the cochlea. And so that's why those so let me back up. High pitches in the English language give clarity and meaning, and change the meaning of words. They give clarity, they give meaning. And so when those are the first to be gone. So those are the most susceptible to damage, and because those are on the outer edge of the cochlea. And so, but in the English language, those are the most important. So if you're saying cat, hat, fat, sat, bat, the only thing that changes in that word, the only phoneme that changes are those high frequency consonants. So when you have, poor high-pitched hearing, you don't have clarity or understanding. But if you still have the low pitches, somebody's talking. So you still have an awareness of sound. So that's why as people age, they say, oh, she's just mumbling, or oh, speak clearer. That's an indication that there's high frequency hearing loss, because you have an awareness of sound. You know that somebody's saying something, but you just can't quite figure out what it is. So I think that's just the complexity of hearing loss, and like I said, the continuum of it, I think is a huge sort of misnomer, or just not enough people are aware of that. And then also the assumption that everybody with hearing loss would sign or use ASL or American Sign Language. That's a cultural choice, and so that's something that's a little bit more complicated.
Could you tell us
a lot of people.
I'm sorry. Could you tell us about the benefits of sign language as opposed to other, like what are the different schools of thought there? Because I know there is all different, and we don't have to say what's wrong or right, but like I know there's different schools of thought.
Yeah. So this is it's a very heated topic in the deaf world and the world of hearing loss. So culturally deaf people are. So we call them, it's called big D deaf. So it means that they are they're a minority culture. They use a completely different language. It's a manual mode of communication. But it is a language. It does have, the different parts of speech and language in it. So that is what the deaf culture is centered around, is the use of American Sign Language. And so there are benefits from that. There are plenty of children who are born to culturally deaf families, and they do sign. And, so that's a huge benefit, is being able to communicate with your family in their home language and native language. And then some children.
I'm sorry. Isn't the beginning of sign language also lip reading as well? Don't they teach the lip reading along with the sign language typically, or no? Is that not? Because I always thought that. Is that not true?
So lip reading isn't necessarily that's not necessarily part of ASL. That's just kind of like a strategy that people with hearing loss use, is lip reading, like you said. I honestly, I can't necessarily speak for that, because I'm not a culturally deaf person, so I'm not sure if they're taught to lip read. I just don't necessarily have enough exposure to answer that question fairly, I don't think.
What does culturally deaf mean when you say that? What does that mean?
Culturally deaf means that person uses American Sign Language. So that is what their culture is centered around, is the use of American Sign Language. That's a minority. That's a minority of people with hearing loss. So the majority of babies who are born with hearing loss, 90% plus, are born to hearing families. So they're, a child with hearing loss is born to parents who hear normally. And so that's a big kind of misunderstanding. So children born to culturally deaf parents are a very small minority of children with hearing loss.
Wow. So you had mentioned to me, we had talked a little bit before you came on the podcast about how you really had to learn to communicate with people in a different way, because not only just in the way of communication and the American language, but also in how you in your psyche, because of not hearing and some of the challenges you had to go through and the fatigue maybe you were taken advantage of, or things happened that you're sort of sorting out now that you can fully hear. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm trying to think like how to exactly approach this. Well, so I think growing up, you just as somebody with hearing loss, you just have to read between the lines. You have to, people say so much more with their bodies and with their faces than what they actually do with their words. So that was something that I think is kind of what I consider like a strength or like a superpower that having hearing loss has given me, is just being able to like read body language and pick up on when my energy changes or facial cues or different tones of speech, and what does that all mean, because for 27 years of my life, like that was a huge, those pieces of information were huge context clues into how am I going to respond, how am I supposed to act, what am I supposed to do now, what do I say, what's appropriate. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've laughed at like the most inappropriate moments because I misheard something. So that was a huge thing. I just actually realized by saying that. So as a person with hearing loss, you're always kind of trying to like solve the puzzle, like fit in the pieces, and just getting things wrong, like butting into conversations or saying something, contributing something that's completely off the wall, but that's what your brain made sense of whatever that person said, and it's wrong, and it's awfully wrong, and it's
I
just
do
been
that
like,
all day long too, Sam. That has nothing to do with
okay,
hearing.
it's awful. But it's embarrassing. But it's really embarrassing, and I think that's something that I kind of like got internalized coming up to is like you don't want to say anything wrong or do anything wrong or offend anybody. But yeah.
Yeah. So like you said, it must have given you like a superpower to be able to read people and a great strength. So you must have a really good insight to people.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do value people. I really do value getting to know people. Connecting with others is something that like I really thrive off of. It's kind of something that I'm like really grateful for. Just like before, with my hearing aid, and even now as an implant recipient, technology has its limitations. I'm not a normal hearing person by any means. I still have hearing loss. I'm still going to struggle in certain situations. My listening bubble is 3 feet. I'm not going to hear anybody behind me. So there's all these things that are inherently just never going to like be there for me. But I remember growing up and just having hearing aids, and I couldn't keep up at a party. Like I waited tables. I couldn't, go back and forth joking with everybody because I just couldn't keep up. The pace was too fast. And, people would be joking and then like I'd say, oh, what was a joke? And then you're just like, oh, it's not as funny the second time around. So you kind of just start to isolate. It's just inherently isolating to have hearing loss in the first place. But then, once you're in those situations and you're socially, you're like, oh, that's awkward, or oh, this is weird, oh, I'm embarrassed. You kind of just start to further isolate yourself, and it's kind of sad, It is pretty sad actually. But then, like after getting my implant, it's like, wow, I can go to these noisy places and I can keep up, and it's like I finally feel like I'm not like an outsider looking in anymore. It's like I can finally, like, because of my implant, I feel like I can finally be the person that like I was supposed to be, which is really exciting. And it's really exciting to be an audiologist who works with kids in the schools and like see those changes and help these kids develop language and auditory skills, and just to play such a critical role is really, really exciting.
Has it given you the tools to let other people know who you are more now? Did you feel like you had to learn who everyone else was, but now people know who you are now? Like you're able to communicate better now that you hear better? Like you're able to be like, this is who I am now with your voice? That's got to feel really good.
I mean, I think, well, you know me, Karen. Like I kind of grew up around you. I've not really been a shy person my entire life, but it definitely is like it's a full circle kind of thing. And now that I have like, my doctorate, and I have I always had like the personal experience, but now I feel like I have the expertise and the integrity as a professional to really impact the lives of kids with hearing loss and their families and that sort of thing. So yeah, in a way, I mean, I know that this is like my purpose in life, is to do what I'm doing and share my story and change change these kids' lives and have a positive influence. So that's something that's kind of exciting and
Yeah, it is. I know it is for you too.
easier to
That's why it's so
do.
great.
Easier to do functionally too. Just having an implant, I can do my job better in terms of the testing that we do and those types of things. So even just functionally, it helps with that.
Well, Rob and I both have kids. Talk to us about why you waited so long to have the cochlear implant, and is that something parents should look at right away for their kids? Can you tell us why you waited till you get yours?
So that's actually it's a very complicated answer. But so cochlear implants in 1990s were very, very they're pretty rudimentary at that time. So they had just started. We had just started implanting people in the 80s. So the technology back then, compared to now, is completely different. And so the candidacy for children is much more stringent than the candidacy for adults. And the candidacy requirements for cochlear implantation have changed as the technology has changed. So when I on the blurb or whatever it says hybrid cochlear implant. So that is because I have a lot of residual hearing for a cochlear implant recipient. I am not a traditional cochlear implant recipient because those levels of hearing would be very profound. But
Can you tell us exactly what residual hearing means for people that don't know?
Sure. It's so like I was saying, hearing loss, it's not just kind of black and white, you have it or you don't. It's just like levels of hearing. So like I have normal sloping to profound hearing loss, and so I still have a lot of hearing that's usable. So it just has to hearing aids amplify sound into what you have left, basically. And so like I have hearing left, and so hearing aids would amplify sounds into whatever I had left. So it's like turning up the volume. Okay. Whereas like the implant completely bypasses a damaged nerve, and it's sending electrical stimulation to your auditory nerve in the brain to process that information. So it's completely bypassing the damaged system there. And so kind of replacing the sense, essentially.
Talk us through the process of when you got that, because it's not just they put it in and all of a sudden you start hearing clearly, right? It's like almost yeah.
So my hearing loss, like my hearing has never changed my entire life. It's been stable. And then I started my doctorate program, and I was like, I know I want to work with kids. I can't understand as well as I need to, so I want to look into different options. And so at that point in time, the hybrid device, which is made for people who have good low-frequency hearing but poor high-frequency hearing, profound high-frequency hearing, and a certain level of word understanding. And so I knew just from my training that I would be a candidate. So I went in for testing, just a cochlear implant evaluation, where they do hearing tests, different speech tests, everything to see if you qualify. And the qualifications are governed by the FDA and cochlear implant companies. So it's not necessarily just it's not necessarily super simple to become a candidate or not. So I always say, so then I was looking into my options, and I had a few options, and I went with this device that I have. And it's an outpatient surgery. So we went in, I think at 6 a.m. and I was getting wheeled out on the cobblestones by like 1 p.m. I was just having this memory flashback because they were wheeling me out in the wheelchair, and there's cobblestones in the area, and my head felt like it just like was like whoop, whoop, like there's so much water like in my ear, and I was like, this is the worst thing because I'm hobbling over the cobblestones. But yeah, so then after that I went back, like healed up for a month, I think it was, and so that year was just healing, and then I went back, and then that's called activation. So then they put the external device on, and they run a bunch of measurements, and then they start the process of just turning everything on. And so I left, they turned it on. It was very anticlimactic, which I kind of knew it would be because I've heard. So like, I'm not like one of those people who's never heard before, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing. I heard the low pitches. I had hearing aids. I've always sort of heard to some extent. So I knew it wasn't going to be earth shattering, but
did you at least
coming
get a
out
good
of there.
Did you at least get a good Instagram moment where you could take a picture, like the first time I've heard or anything, anything like that?
Yeah, so it's so funny though. I kind of feel bad. Like my mom and my now ex-husband, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna go get food. Let us know if we can, when you're turning it on." And the audiologist was like ready to turn it on. And I had texted him, and she's like, "Well, do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." So I'm like, I just want to get this over with. Like, I kind of don't want to do it in front of other people either, because I know, people have expectations of like, oh, is it going to be that beautiful moment, like YouTube moment? And I knew it wasn't going to be, so I was like, I'll just do it by myself. And so they were pretty mad at me for that, but I was fine with it.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty personal journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So what would be the signs if somebody has what are the signs maybe that your child isn't hearing? So because we have, a lot of people have kids, and we want to make sure that, they're taken care of. So what would be some of the signs that your child maybe not hearing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing would be a speech delay, not developing language in the appropriate at the appropriate times. Also, not localizing, not turning to sound if you're behind them and they're not paying attention to you. Those kinds of things, just like a lack of sound awareness, not speaking.
Does loss of hearing get undiagnosed for or looked over because they think it's other diagnoses, like possibly maybe autism or things like that, where children might not respond in the same sort of way and they think it might be that? Or no, is that better now because they're doing
so that is kind of tricky because children with autism can also have hearing loss, or children with ADHD can also have hearing loss, but they all sort of present the same. I would say, I think a lot of times maybe the hearing loss label is used more earlier on than an ASD or an ADHD label, just because those are a little bit I guess heavier, sort of. So some kids will get into services or special education or whatever they need, early intervention, under a potential hearing loss or speech delay. Those are sort of like can be the gateway into services that may later turn out to be that, oh, the child has ASD or they have ADHD. There are some tests, like there's testing that we can do to diagnose hearing loss that is it's called an auditory brainstem response. And so the children, if they are not cooperating or they can't do behavioral testing, we can do that, and then we can diagnose and determine if there is a true hearing loss. So that's kind of how we can delineate if it's something else than hearing loss.
Did you hear your voice always in your head? That would be something, I'm guessing, when they flipped the switch that you started hearing your voice more, or no? Did you always know your own voice?
It's like the quality of my voice became different. Like it's weird because everybody, most normal hearing people would say that like my hearing aid would sound robotic, or like the implant sounds robotic if you play stimulations and stuff. But it's really hard. Like you do have your inner voice, and so I like everything that I think I've gained from the implant. I've always heard it in my own voice. So, but I know my voice, like the perception of my voice definitely changed when I got my implant. I can't necessarily recall how, but I know a lot of my friends, they said that my speech became much more clear, and like my volume control was much better. I always used to get in trouble for being too loud, especially like when I got excited. But if you you have that kind of auditory feedback loop where you're self-regulating, because you can hear how loud your voice is, or you can hear your tone or your pitch, and something's off, so you change it. And as somebody with hearing loss, I didn't really necessarily have that awareness, and so with the implant, it definitely has gotten my voice has gotten in much more normal levels, like under control in some ways.
Yeah, but to you always had your inner voice, so that was just always your voice, which I find fascinating, right? Like it was in there, you just didn't have the vehicle to bring it out. That's curious, right?
Absolutely.
I know. Like, and you didn't have that whole like, oh, I hate the way I sound, like everybody does. Yeah.
Yeah, I will probably hate how I sound on this, but it's okay.
So Sam, as you mentioned, and you brought out a very good point that in the 90s, hearing tests weren't as frequent as they are now for infants. What other medical developments have happened since the mid 90s until where we're at now, sitting here in 2021, that have really benefited from diagnosing hearing concerns earlier, and then also putting parents in a much better position to make quality decisions on what they ought to be doing to assist their children with that?
So, every child there's a federal mandate that every child their hearing has to be tested before they leave the hospital, or there are midwives. If there's a birth by midwives or whatever, somebody from the state goes out there and tests that child's hearing. So that is, I would say, probably the biggest development in terms of diagnosing hearing loss and catching it early and getting an early intervention. Different, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Technology, things like that. And so in early intervention, in Michigan, we have a group called Hands and Voices, and so they have parent guides, and so they have the means to contact any parents who are given the news that their child has hearing loss. And so it's and other parents of children with hearing loss who are kind of going in the home, and they're able to talk about and talk in an unbiased way of the family's options in terms of technology or mode of language, that kind of thing, and just being supportive too. So that, I think, is a really amazing development and just early intervention in general. My mom, I was caught late, and so the early intervention services were non-existent. So early intervention is birth until 3, and so then at that 3 to 4 year old, your services transition to the school. So those early intervention services are very family based versus school based, and so even just the development of those programs and the strengthening of those programs, I think, is a huge has been a huge transformation in the world of hearing loss. And then just technology in general. We can connect through, like, I stream through my phone through my implant, or things like that. So there's a lot of streaming and connectivity. I think there's some hearing aids that have like fitness monitors and heart rate monitors and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really cool features like that. But then just the technology in general, the implant, the electrode arrays that go into the cochlear are smaller, less damaging. So a lot more people can be candidates for cochlear implants than ever before. Sorry.
That's all right.
That's okay. Sam, were you always in immersion with your you okay?
It's pitch today. I'm sorry. What was that?
That's okay.
Yeah.
Were you completely immersed in regular school with regular hearing kids, or did you have special schooling? And what do you recommend normally? Does it just depend on the child? Like, would you recommend full immersion in a all hearing class?
Well, yeah. So, just in general, the goal for special education in this era is mainstreaming. So, in general, that's the goal, is for all of the kids to be in the mainstream general education with normal hearing peers or typically developing peers, whatever you would like to call them. But so that's the goal of all special education, is to have all the services sort of be in the mainstream setting. Back in the day, it wasn't that way. So we used to have a lot of center-based programs for kids with hearing loss, but those have really just, the trend is to shut those down and get the services in their home district with their friends in their home schools and those kinds of things. I went to a special education preschool, and then I was mainstream for the rest of my education. So I was in general education with an FM system, preferential seating, note taking if I needed it, different accommodations.
Wow. So what can a person do to help other people that might be having hearing loss? How can we help them hear us better, just as a person, to help them with their fatigue? And meet them sort of halfway. If we understand they're having a hearing loss, instead of getting irritated, they're not hearing us. That's what I tend to do.
Well, it's so interesting because it goes both ways, because sometimes so the person with hearing loss gets irritated because nobody's like really helping them, but then it just goes both ways. I would say the most is probably to be, let's see. So first is getting somebody's attention when they're talking or when you're trying to talk to them, especially if it's a noisy environment, like tap them on the shoulder or make sure that they're looking at you for those facial cues. That's a huge one. Being mindful of the environment too. I notice this a lot whenever, and this is something I've internalized as an adult too, is like I always seek out a person or prefer one-on-one conversations or maybe two-on-one conversations because that's something I can keep up with. So I noticed I do that myself is, I'll talk to one person at the bar or two people at the party, but it gets to be too big sometimes and too hard to follow. So if your communication partner does have hearing issues, then that's something to think about and consider is maybe going into the corner and having a conversation on your own and then coming back or something like that. Lighting is important, especially now with all the Zoom calls and stuff. Like the light hitting your face, not behind your face, is really big for that.
Yeah.
And then what else? There's something I was thinking of too. And not just repeating. Like, can you? Like, I didn't hear you. Can what? Huh? Mm-hmm. Don't necessarily just repeat. You could rephrase it. So like if you can, whatever you're saying, and just kind of flip it, like the phrase, like change it. On the phone too, it's kind of hard. It's just funny. Sometimes I will be on the phone with my mom and I cannot understand what she's saying, and she's said it a million times, and I actually end up asking her to spell out the word. I'm like, Mom, can you just spell the word? And she'll just spell the word, and then I'm like, oh, okay, and then just get on with the conversation. But not changing the phrase is how you're saying something is really helpful too.
That's really good because I understood what you were saying earlier with the high pitch and low pitch frequencies. If someone uses different synonyms to describe what they're saying, it might be on a different end of that frequency spectrum, which would allow you to hear it better. That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got it. That's exactly what it is. It's just something that's just not connecting. It's not working. So if you change, the entire word or whatever, you're going to get it normally. So
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think I love the fact that like you're out there and you're really listening to people. Has it made you really be a better communicator of like kind of like just like being very laser focused on what you want to communicate with people? Because I mean, and I do it all the time. I just fill up the the whole day with a bunch of words, and you know what I mean. Like, are you very succinct about what you, or do you like talking a lot? Or
I think I just like to talk a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, just stop talking. Like, it's but
well, not on the podcast. We need you to talk. Kind of
yeah, no, you're right. No, that's about it. But yeah, I mean, I definitely do enjoy talking, and like I was saying earlier, I really do enjoy connecting with people, and so that is, I think, just a huge way that I've been able to connect with others is by talking, and hopefully providing a safe and opening space for people to open up and be vulnerable and, be their true selves too.
Mm-hmm. Can you turn off your cochlear implant or turn it down and just have like the noise of the piece? Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how does that, can you do that and like check out a bit? Does that help you check out a bit, or no, you can kind of do that in your mind anyway? Because that seems like that would be a great feature. Yeah, just take that right off. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I can absolutely take it off. I normally only take it off if I'm like by myself or whatever, because it's. I mean, I can't necessarily I can't do my job without it. I can't. Really. If I go out in public without it on, I get really anxious just because. I mean, if you don't necessarily know what people are going to say to you, and if I do think it's also, it's kind of weird, but I always prefer for people to see my devices, because I think that if they see those devices, they might kind of give a little bit more grace. Like, if I don't have my implant on or whatever, I'm not going to be able to hear, and I'm going to be acting potentially not. Okay, that's the wrong way to phrase it. But I might not respond appropriately to what they're saying to me, and so that gives me anxiety. So I'd rather just have my implant on in those cases.
Well, they might be more inclined to try and get your attention properly rather than just trying to call you from across the room, which,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the devices I have now, they're just like kind of, I don't know if you can see, but it's just kind of like a wire. Versus when I was growing up, I had like a ear mode, a full ear mode that was all bright colors and stuff. So the transition from this little dinky thing to that, or from that, or like kind of, at first it was very like anxiety provoking because that was something I relied on, was people seeing that I had hearing loss before if anything else went wrong or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is very insightful. It really has taught me a lot to kind of like, we got to look out for each other and notice the signs and be aware of what other people are going through so we can actually hear them and communicate with them.
Yeah, I think too, like it's a good top level lesson, but this is something that I try and reinforce in a lot of people and people that work for me and just people that I know, is like meaningful communication. And that requires focus. So whether it's hearing, non-hearing, that meaningful level of focus when you're speaking with somebody, like be there, be present.
Yeah. That's good.
And just that alone would fix a lot of these, issues that we're having with very passive, lackluster, half effort communication.
Yeah, it's active listening, right?
Yeah, that's huge.
That's really important. Yeah, there's so much to learn. And tell us, speaking of learning, what do you do in your day job with children? So tell us a little bit about that and how we can find you.
Well, we're kind of finally back to normal, so it's so much better than last year. But so on a daily basis, I'll check. So I service 17. Well, we service 17 school districts as a program here, and I have a caseload of about 140 kids, and there's 2 other audiologists who have about the same number of kids, and so we have a center-based program at the elementary level and middle school level. So we have teachers of the deaf in a self-contained classroom, and there are kids who are bused in to this elementary school to have that and very specific instruction. And so that part of the job here is so in our program, we actually provide all the students here with school hearing aids. So they have a set of hearing aids that they'll put on for school. So so we will test hearing, we'll program the hearing aids, we program what we call a DM system, which is the teacher wears a microphone, and then the student will have a receiver that picks. So then that teacher's voice is directly into that child's hearing aid or cochlear implants. So that's combating the reverberance and the background noise and distance in a classroom. So we make sure that those are all working, and then we'll also do different evaluations to see that, just kind of show the benefit of wearing hearing aids and wearing the microphones by introducing background noise and distance. And so we're validating and verifying that all the equipment is working, and so these kids have access to their education. And then we'll attend meetings and consult and those kinds of things.
What are the adjustments that you've had to make with the mask wearing and have in the schools, and what is the recommendations for parents now that the children with hearing loss are with people with masks? How has that changed?
I'm honest. That's kind of a hard question, because there's so much that we already are doing in terms of especially with the personal microphone systems. There's so much that we're doing, and that combats a lot of the problems inherently. So you can't. Well, it solves the problem of auditorily, it solves the problem, but there's the visual cues that doesn't necessarily fix it. So last year we do auditory training as well, which is we're teaching the children how to listen. So it's similar to speech therapy, but we're using audition. So we're really teaching the child how to listen and hear. So we do that. And so in those sessions, we got permission from the parents to wear face shields, and we wear face shields with the barrier. Because, these kids are, we're teaching kindergartners how to listen. And so a huge part of that is facial cues.
Yeah. Wow. I think we all need that lesson, don't you, Rob? Just learn how to listen.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It's especially when you have the majority of communication is nonverbal. But most of everyone's skill with communication is only verbal, which I think is a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Oh, that is a really, that's a,
Yeah.
I like that.
Quote
That's
from
really
Rob,
good.
Rob Johnson. He's the man. Yeah.
Johnny, cut that out.
Yeah.
Let's use it as a
It's our
clip.
intellectual property. Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. That's true though. Like I got a book about active listening. It really is an activity. And I need to get better at it. I really, I think I'm listening or, not just aware and being in the moment. That's so important in everything in life, right? So really it does go back to listening, active listening.
It's huge.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's been great having you here today. And we usually ask our guests, and I'm going to have you, I'm going to ask the question and then have you hold the answer. What is something somebody sitting at home today thinking about possibly their hearing experience or somebody they love? What is something they can do right now to sort of make that better or different thoughts or something that you could recommend to our listeners just to start thinking differently about either listening or responding or just, something that could help them out today. But before we do that, Rob, I just wanted to mention Hands on Health chiropractor, right? Dr. Adam, he's been here before.
I do.
And before I choke myself on here, I might
say,
need a chiropractor after I choke myself.
Yeah.
So Hands on Health.
Don't try this at home.
No, don't try that out for my very last trick. So Dr. Adam from Hands on Health chiropractor is an amazing guy. His tagline is set your spine to superhero, which standing up straight does change your day and does change how people listen to you and how you speak too, right?
I've heard that rumor.
Yeah, right. So we just want to mention them. And Sherry will be back next week. She's out living her good fat life. And we missed her today, but we're so happy to have you today, Rob. And
I miss her too.
Yeah.
I feel like she's, it's not the same.
I know, it's not
Sherry.
the same. It's not
Just
the
like
same.
when you're gone. It's, you
Oh,
need
thank
both
you.
of you here.
Yeah, but it's great having you here too, Rob. Like if we have to have a co-host, like you're the man, right?
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You're too kind.
Yeah. So Sam, what's the answer?
It's a tough question, but kind of what we've all been saying this whole podcast is listen. If you were to lose your ability to communicate, what are you losing? And so if you're avoiding, getting help with your hearing, or you think you have hearing loss, or you think you're noticing it in somebody else, it's so much more than just a device that people can see. It's literally your connection to the world and to your family. So I think I would just encourage people to maybe move beyond their ego and really cherish put the investment in your communication, and that does start by listening.
Wow, that's great advice. Move beyond your ego and listen. Yeah, I think we've solved all the world's problems here today. How can somebody find you?
That is my goal.
Yeah. Oh, she went on mute.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think as we move to wrap up like that, that's one thing that I really encourage people to do is figure out how can you be a better communicator? And I'll tell you this, the answer is not speaking more. A lot of it is just watching people and nonverbal cues. And especially if someone was, non-hearing or had limited hearing, you're going to pick up a lot more of those visual cues, the facial gestures, just the micro expressions that come along with communication. And that's a huge thing that I'm a big studier of, because that's how you read people.
Well, and also you learn a lot about yourself, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look at other people. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And how can people find you, Sam?
I guess I have an email. I guess people could email me, or LinkedIn is a good way, actually, probably.
What is your email?
Email. I could do that. Do you want me to just say it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Samantha.Kesteloot@gmail.com. So my first and then period last name @gmail.
Fantastic.
That'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
so you don't have to
awesome.
worry about spellings and getting it correct or incorrect. So it'll all be in the show notes as well.
Great.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, we're off to live our good fat life. And thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
And thank you,
Sam.
Rob.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam.
Sure.